And welcome to All Things Conflict with me, Maria Arper, your host, trying to bring you exciting and interesting and wise guests as usual. And today we struck lucky. We've got David Liddle from TCM. Now, David is well known and globally recognised in the field of people and culture and leadership. And he's agreed to share with us some of his, some of the background of his work, some of his history, and where he's going in the workspace for leaders and workplaces and employees. Welcome. And David, welcome to All Things Conflict. I can't believe we're doing this. It's so exciting for me. And I think one of the things, your name is synonymous, but, if I looked in the dictionary and said, workplace culture, people in those environments, your name, David Liddle and TCM, would be in the dictionary definition. So welcome.
That is very kind of you to say, Maria. And to think we're having that kind of impact makes me feel very proud. And I'm delighted to be here. And congratulations with the podcast. And it's a real pleasure and a privilege to be here today. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, I've known you probably 30 years-ish. And I've certainly known you over 20 years. And sort of your name would come up, and I'm guessing my name would come up at your end. And then we finally had occasion to actually talk. And I've just watched you, from the sidelines, watched TCM, Total Conflict Management, isn't it?
That's correct.
I've watched you take that from the early stages when nobody had thought about this, and you were that person on your own with a vision, and growing that to this, enormous business with lots of associates and lots of people. I mean, maybe you could start by just talking us through that.
Oh, well, thank you, Maria. It's been such an exciting journey. So, I had a real vision. I could see conflict was so corrosive and pernicious and damaging. My background was in community relations and race relations, which I did my first degree in. And, I know you've done so much work in community and restorative justice and restorative practices, Maria. And I think we've probably both seen the same things. The first one is the destructive nature of unresolved conflict and how harmful it is. And of course, the powerful transformative element of conflict when it's handled well is this sort of the yin and the yang, the light and the dark of conflict. And I've always been fascinated by how people behave and why they behave, how they react. Although the air that we create, I always call this the air we create, the actions, interactions and reactions that we have when we're in conflict, and how oftentimes they can be quite destructive and harmful because we're not being taught or shown how to handle these issues differently, how to act in a more constructive way, how to interact in a more civil way, how to react or to respond in a more empathetic way. And as soon as we start to give people those skills and show them the possibility, the art of the possible, they really engage with it. And that's the powerful nature of conflict resolution, which I love and which I enjoy. So it's a passion I have, and Total Conflict Management was really bringing that to life to say, actually, how do we bring this into the world of work? And how do we make these skills and approaches more suitable for managers that they can use every day, quality conversations for managers and for our leaders? And of course, the area I work in a lot, Maria, is human resources and helping HR to create a positive air in our workplaces. And that's an interesting and challenging area of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose, it's been, you've grown, you started off and then thought, how do we bring this into workplaces? Are there any sort of pivotal moments for you, when you can look back and go, like I'm hearing you say that, unresolved conflict is pernicious and and dark and takes us to bad places, but yet when we give people skills they engage with them.
Absolutely. It's a really interesting point. So there's been a few sort of pivotal moments. I'll try and pick up two or three of them. I think the first one was when I came out of community mediation and restorative justice, which I was doing through the 90s. And I did an MBA and I started to work with two large London boroughs, one in Croydon and one in Hounslow, developing restorative practices within those workplaces in the context of dignity at work and fair treatment policies. And also was working with the Cabinet Office to introduce restorative practices into the civil service. And that moment was around 2000, 2001, Maria, when I realised that what I'd learned in community relations was directly aligned to what was also going on in our workplaces. And I recognised that although people weren't having knives pulled at them and they weren't having their houses burgled and they weren't sort of necessarily victims of serious crime or antisocial behaviour, as I was used to, the impact of conflict, and it went by many names, bullying, harassment, discrimination, conflict more widely, was as impactful on their lives and as destructive as the community side of things. So I realised that the skills I had in work in communities was directly aligned into our workplaces. So I loved doing the MBA. That gave me the confidence to set up my business in 2001. So total conflict management, that was a bit of a mouthful, Maria. That's my first branding mistake. I love branding, by the way. I love branding side of things, but that was a bit of an error because what a mouthful. And that was a blend of total quality management, Japanese management systems, which I'm a huge fan of, Kaizen in particular, continuous improvement, and integrated conflict management systems, which was coming out of the States, Harvard and Cornell. We're doing some interesting work in those spaces. So I blended TQM and integrated conflict management systems to create TCM. But I had this vision of this system-wide whole organization approach. But what actually happened in the early days was people would usher me in through the basement door and bring me in as a mediator to put out the fire after everyone else had tried and failed to resolve it. So my first 10 years of business were very transactional, it felt, very much at the end of the conflict. So the next pivotal moment for me was when I started to, after 10 years of mediating and learning how and why businesses work the way they did, is I think for me was the most damaging thing I saw every time was the grievance procedure, Maria. I saw the grievance process as pouring fuel on the flames of conflict and division. In fact, I spoke to people about the grievance procedure, and you know what they said to me? They said the grievance procedure is more damaging and harmful than the issues which gave rise to the grievance occurring in the first place. So I launched the resolution policy, which then latterly became the resolution framework, as an alternative to the grievance procedure in 2013. And that felt to me like the most pivotal moment in my career, because it shifted from mediation as I'd use the word transactional, but it felt transactional at the end of a process to try and prevent risk of harm to the organization, less concerned about the people. Now we're starting to see organizations working upstream start to embed the principles of restorative practice and mediation, compassion, dialogue, empathy, engagement, connection, collaboration into the systems for resolving issues. I think 2013 relaunched my career from a mediator mediating a dispute to a mediator identifying and designing systems and processes that prevented those disputes becoming destructive in the first place. And that felt to me, a very exciting, pivotal moment. And that relaunched everything that I did at TCM.
Yeah, I think that I think we were leading parallel lives, because I was doing a lot of sort of gang warfare stuff on the streets and started to see, and I think you're saying the same thing, and perhaps we can expand on it, is that, if all you do is rely on mediation, then you're waiting for stuff to have happened. The traditional mediation model is still just a reaction or a response to an incident or a set of circumstances. And I started to see, and what I'm hearing you did, is that there's more that has to be done so you don't get there in the first place. Or if you do get there, it's part of a bigger journey.
Massive. I mean, it kind of goes back to the nature-nurture argument, and I still believe it does. Is it the nature of people to engage in destructive, harmful conflict? Or is it a nurturing environment in our workplaces through the system which invokes and engenders destructive and harmful conflict? I'm absolutely on the side of the latter. People do not come to work to be a bad person. People do not come to work to do a bad job. People fall into these systems which in themselves are reactive, destructive, corrosive, blame-oriented, retributive, adversarial, confrontational, and it's those systems that we experience in our workplace. I think similar in our communities, but in our workplaces in particular, we experience these systems, and then they become the script that then drives the behaviors. So I'm firmly of the view that if we want to change the behaviors in the workplace, we need to change the script. And the script are the systems and processes that have been developed. And I found it both an exciting and enjoyable aspect, but a deeply frustrating element to my career. And it's only really latterly that I felt organizations are starting to wake up and recognize the importance of justice and fairness and inclusion and empathy. I think they've been given lip service up to this point. I feel some organizations have really embraced it, but I see organizations maintaining systems which are divisive and destructive, even though the evidence is stacking up that there are better ways for resolving issues. And one starts to question, why? Why would you prefer to have a system and a process which is harmful? Why don't you invest in your managers to give them the skills to resolve issues constructively? Why do you have grievance procedures which are binary and retributive and adversarial and confrontational? And the corollary there is, who's benefited from this? Who benefits from having a workforce which is under stress and duress and struggling and finding it hard to gain meaning and purpose through systems which are designed? And I'm very much in the view now of who benefits and why do they benefit? And how do we find new ways of showing to leaders and managers and people professionals that you benefit more significantly by reducing those processes and the rules-based system which cause so much harm and trauma? You also benefit as an organization. And that's where my career is at the moment, is shining on a light on the significant benefits that organizations experience when they start to move from grievance and disciplinary to resolution processes, when HR transforms to a people and culture function, when leaders adopt the integrative leadership principles of inclusive leadership and transformational leadership and servant leadership. And these are no longer soft, naive ideals from some person who's wearing rose-tinted glasses. These have a direct, clear impact on the bottom line benefits of the organization, attracting the top talent, retaining your top talent, creating an engaged, a healthy, a happy, a productive workforce. And surely that has to be good for the business, as well as being good for our people. And as we know in mediation parlance, it's a win-win outcome. And surely that has to be better than the systems that we've seen employed. So I felt like I was the corporate band-aid. I did not like that feeling. When I realized I was being brought in to plaster over, I realized that was not why I came into this profession. Yeah. So that's the direction of travel we're moving in now.
So in picking up and sort of riffing off what I've heard you say, one of the questions that I like to ask is, how is this life enriching? It's just such a simple question, isn't it? Yeah. And that plays into the things you said. Who does it benefit? Why are we doing this? But I think that, and this is a theory of mine, I just want to test it out on you and see what you think. So I've been thinking about, if you go to school, and most schools have a sort of punitive element to them, and what you learned was to do as you're told or you get punished, and then you found ways to not do as you were told in hidden places to try not to get caught. That embeds something in us. And what I see is when I go into places where people gather, like workplaces, that when people can't figure it, what they do is they're actually just repeating secondary school.
I think that's a really good point. I think that kind of hierarchy and slightly autocratic experience and structure that we see in our classrooms and in schools more generally, I think does play out in the model of our workplaces. And I think it speaks to this issue of risk. I'm really interested in the concept of risk and reward in our organizations, and it's the same within school, risk and reward, because I think we see in the case of the school necessarily the students, and in our workplace similarly the employees, as a risk, and we create systems and processes to manage said risk. Now look at the employee handbook. Dear new colleague, welcome to your new wonderful world of work. We're delighted to have you here, with a slightly faded signature from the CEO on the front page. Page 2 of our lovely employee handbook, which goes over about 150 pages, by the way. Page 2 is, this is what happens when you underperform. Page 5, this is what happens when you're bullied. Page 10, when you bully someone else. when you go onto social media and say bad things, this is what happens, and this is what we'll do to you, and this is what happens when you have a grievance. And what the policy is actually saying is, welcome to the new world of work. We're delighted to have you here, but we don't trust you, and you're a risk. So we're going to wrap you up in complexity, bureaucracy, and these rules-based systems. We're going to manage you as a risk. And I think that's very much similar in our school environment. So we're kind of used to that. We look at it and go, okay, well, it looks and feels normal, but it's not normal. We're not a risk. We are the reward. And if you treat me like a risk, I'll start to behave like a risk, and I won't speak up, but I won't behave in the way that you expect. And what that does, and I think is a really important message for leaders and for people, professionals, and for managers, when we start to treat people like a risk, they don't speak up. And I don't mean speak up as in calling out bad behaviors. What I mean about being innovative, being creative, generating the new ideas. Now, the big next conflict that we'll experience is going to be man versus machine, or people versus machine. That intersection between machines and organizations and human beings. And that's going to be a really interesting space, because in that space, we need innovation, we need creativity, and we need to bring the best of us as human beings. So for me, for organizations who are really concerned about risk versus reward, if all of our rules-based systems are about managing and mitigating risk from the employee who is themselves likely to cause us harm, which we're not, we don't come to work to do a bad job or create harm. Less than 1% of most workforces would go to a tribunal or go to court. Yet the rules-based system is designed as though everyone is going to take us to court. They're not going to, trust me, they're not. They just want to enjoy work and do a good job and go home safe at the end of the day and be respected and treated with civility in that space. And what a wonderful space that is. So if we start to focus on how do we generate and drive innovation and creativity through dialogue and through positive engagement, that creates the currency of the future of work. And Maria, what better time to do that than when we disagree? Doesn't disagreement and disagreement management present the best opportunity for innovation and creativity? Ergo, is conflict resolution not the driver of the future of work? Is it not better, therefore, that we redesign and reset and recalibrate all of the systems for conflict management to release the best of humanity to generate the reward than treat us as a risk and dampen down the one thing that makes us who the best that we are as human beings? If we can't get that right, we might as well just hand it to the machines.
Absolutely. I mean, so I always say, the way I like to put this is that conflict is the biggest free resource we have.
Correct.
And used properly will generate happy, healthy, committed and collaborative teams and workforces, and beyond that to families and all sorts of things. Once we see that actually, so my phrase is, I like to walk towards conflict with love.
Yeah. And it makes so much sense. I think there's the thing I would add to that as well is it creates high performance. It's so hard to perform well at your best if you're not speaking to a colleague, or you feel like your manager's just putting you down, or it's a hostile work environment. And all of the things that make work great are impeded by conflict. Yet when I am in that space, and when I am treated with compassion and dignity and respect, then my voice is heard and I can contribute. And that people walk towards it with love in the way you've described. Do you know something? I'll be a bit nicer to that customer today. I'll pick up the phone and be a bit more, I don't know, a bit more respectful, a bit more customer oriented. I might just stay a little bit later to get that piece of work done. So if I put in 10% extra discretionary effort because of that situation that we've described, and that's optimized across the whole workforce, imagine if we deliver change at scale with compassion. And compassion can drive change at scale. If everyone put in 10% extra discretionary effort, the business would report record profits that year. So, and also we can change culture one conversation at a time. You know, I often speak to managers about cultural transformation. How do I change the culture? Oh, they tell me it's an oil tanker, David. It takes years to turn around. I can't do anything. I'm just a lowly manager working in a division somewhere. I don't have say. It's like, no, that's not the case at all. You have agency, you have power, and you have power, authority, and control, PAC. And where you apply that power, authority, and control and align it to the needs and motivations of people in the workforce, you can drive significant change as a manager. and as a leader. So you do have agency. You can walk towards this, as you said, walk towards it with love, walk towards it with compassion and a desire to listen and understand. Wow, what a workplace we could create.
What an amazing workplace we could create. As I was listening to you, I was thinking about how do we get to this? In fact, actually, I'll tell you what popped up for me was a pivotal mediation I did in the neighbour dispute
Oh,
field,
yes.
which I just think taught me so much. I was very early on, and it just kind of taught me everything in a moment, where two women were going at it. One lived upstairs, one lived downstairs, one wanted, one was having parties and things like that. And they were going at it because the person who was not having the parties believed that she had the moral high ground and that she was perfectly entitled to tell someone else to turn the music down. And on the face of it, of course, we need to live together. But she was so hostile in the way she was telling her downstairs neighbour to behave that, of course, it had erupted. And in the middle of this mediation, the lady who had the loud music just suddenly went, "Oh, I get it. I get it. You want me to do something for you. You want me to think about you and be considerate towards you." And the lady upstairs going, yes, that's what I want. And she said, "Make me like you, because right now you look like a bitch." And in that moment, I was like, that's it, isn't it? Crudely put.
But exactly right. And now they can connect. Isn't that a great moment as well when they actually do start to connect in that way? And that's just in their own language and their own tone. And that's the space that we're trying to create in organizations. And it works as well. That's the important thing. Now, I'm working with the BBC at the moment. We've been working with the BBC for several years now. But the BBC have adopted the resolution framework, which we're really excited about. And everyone knows the BBC has its fair share of high profile challenges. But working within the BBC, we've trained hundreds of managers and people, professionals across the BBC, specifically to help them have those conversations. And the feedback we get time and time again is the surprise on people's face that they actually can connect and listen to each other. And then the other thing that managers tell me they didn't recognise would be so impactful was how long it can take to resolve issues when they don't deal with issues, when they don't bring people together, and how quickly issues can be resolved when people connect that way. And the big message from managers, why when we give these skills weeks, months, years ago, fill in the gaps, and why aren't we doing this every day? Why aren't these everyday conversations? Because when we use them, we're chatting, we resolve the conflicts, and then we get to this really interesting space as well, the aftermath. I love the aftermath of conflict resolution as well. I love the part where we're seeing the parties find that sort of shared connection, that shared human connection, the shared need, that convergence. But I love the bit afterwards. There's a calm. And we start to go into reflective mode. Well, how did we get here in the first place? Why did this happen? It turns out we were friends years ago. Something changed. Someone got promoted. Something happened. We stopped doing that. And then we start to go, okay, well, how can we get back to that point? How can we find some new meaning in our relationship? And the conflict resolution work that I find often the most powerful and transformational is the aftermath period, once the substantive issues have been resolved. And then those issues have been cleared, the toxins have been released from the relationship. And then we go into a deeper sense, I think, of human connection. And that's, for me, some of the most transformational work. And I love as well at that stage, Maria. So my work here is done as a mediator. I'll go and make us a cup of coffee. And my best mediation work that I do, and we train this, is mediation in absentia, is we've created the conditions and it's so powerful, I can now leave the room. And you've got this. And that, for me, is the best mediation. Best mediations I do is when I'm making a cup of tea in the nearest kitchen for the parties.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's absolutely right. It's that, that's what we do. We create the conditions. We don't fix anything. We're not telling anyone what to do. We're not directing.
Correct. Yeah.
We're offering people a different set of lenses and creating a space, a comfortable space for people to explore those lenses and see what fits and what doesn't.
Absolutely. And just to make those adjustments, again, I'll talk about actions, interactions, and reactions. I was working with two executive, very senior leaders from an organization, and the way that one of them was talking to the other one was really, it was challenging. The language that was being used was being was very challenging, but they were at the level where it was almost tolerable. But actually sitting down with the two parties and allowing the person who'd been on the receiving end to really express just how damaging it was for them and the impact it had on them, and for the other one to hear and understand that some of the language and some of the you've heard a few things in your career. I've heard a few things, but, when you sat there as a mediator to go okay, but when you're sat there and then you just hear it coming out, but it's just and it's genuine, and it's not trying to be spiteful or malicious or causing, but it's genuine, and you can see the other person's shoulders go, wow, okay, you're playing that back to me, and then I can start to make some really good, powerful decisions about changing behavior. And it's in that moment, and I think that kind of leads me into some thinking around behavioral change, because organizations, the rules-based system is designed to either manage behavior or change behavior or create the behaviors that we need. I don't think people truly recognize that the most powerful way to drive behavioral change is to give people agency and a deep sense of understanding of the impact of their behavior on another person. And you don't get that through investigative processes or hearings or determination panels or so on and so forth. Everyone's in defend and attack mode and black and white and right and wrong, and the finger of blame is pointing around. And my view on these processes that I see, disciplinary procedures, performance management systems, grievance processes, which are designed to drive behavioural change to a point, are the complete antithesis of behavioural change. They solidify the bad behaviours, and they actually invoke and encourage blame-oriented processes and defend and attack. And as I see so many times, particularly at senior leadership level, but elsewhere as well, when you're working with individuals and they feel attacked, they defend themselves. And what's the best form of defense is attack. Now, these are smart people, Maria. They lie in bed thinking about this. They can process the complexity, and they realize they're under attack. So I'm going to get my defense in, my attack in first. And so it creates this powerful dynamic between very intelligent, articulate people who are just constantly attacking each other. It's exhausting. You can see it on their faces. Yeah. They are exhausted and traumatized and hurt and harmed, and their careers are destroyed. Their lives, for some of them, you can see the bad habits they're getting into, the things they're doing to themselves. It's just destructive in so many ways. And you do think there's a moral, ethical, and also a business duty on HR professionals in particular to start to recognize that the systems and processes that they've designed at work are more traumatic and re-traumatizing, more damaging and destructive than any of the bad behaviors that they were designed to mitigate or to create. And my call to HR professionals and people professionals is you have an absolute duty to look at the policies and processes in your organizations and go and listen to the people who are using them. Maria, I'm a big fan of user experience, and I've yet to walk into an organization of someone who's been through a grievance or redundancy or disciplinary process where the HR department sends out, I mean, if anyone's listening to this and they've got examples of this, please share them, because sends out a survey monkey form or a type form survey to someone who's been through the process, asking them for their feedback.
Yeah.
And it's not because they haven't thought of it, because they fill them in when they go on holiday and when they go to restaurants, so they know how to do a form. I'll tell you why they don't do them, Maria. It's because they know exactly what they're going to be told. It'll be 1-star ratings all the way with the most damaging, harmful feedback. So if you're an HR professional, did you come into HR to create 1-star ratings from the systems that you're using? Or did you come in to create 5-star ratings? When you know how to do a 5-star rating as an HR professional, you know what a good service looks like. You know what the bar looks like. You know what the standards are. Well, you're not operating at those standards. That's why you're not asking the feedback. So redesign the systems that you have. Otherwise, I think it presents an existential threat to the role that HR plays in our workplaces, because thankfully, at long last, there's a lot of people now calling out this destructive and divisive framework, and it's on HR and leaders, of course, who play a critical role here. And there are alternatives. It's not like we have to have a grievance procedure or disciplinary process. There's no legal duty on organizations to have these vindictive, vicious processes. They can do it differently, more innovation. I say our resolution framework, it's free. You can go to resolutionframework.com, download it, no questions asked. If you don't like it, just delete it. At least have a look at it. It's not hard. It's there.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing because, on the one hand, one of the things I talk about is no organisation or system is going to let one person or one small group of people stick a spanner in the works and bring it to a halt, right? It's never going to do that. So some of the processes that you're talking about are designed to prevent disruption, to prevent disturbances and disruptions and obstacles. And of course, I expect systems to be able to do that, because if there is a massive disruption, it'll affect more people. But for me to do that on its own and call that conflict resolution is completely dishonest.
Absolutely.
Because the conflict resolution part is when the relationships have been fully restored, or if they were never there in the first place, created into something human.
It's a really interesting point. So when I go in and start digging around these, firstly I'll take a bit of a neuroscience look at it, Maria. So I kind of look at these, and because I hear all of these reasons for having these processes. So the first thing I say is, like, what do you as a people professional, as a manager, think is the best state for people to do their best work? Is it happy or unhappy? No, of course it's happy. Okay, well, let's just take so let's look at cortisol and oxytocin, dopamine, and endorphin, serotonin. Let's just look at the policy through the lens of happy hormones or stressor hormones. That's simple, okay? So with a green pen, mark all of the policies which were likely to generate a dopamine hit or a serotonin response or some oxytocin flow or some different chemicals in the body. And then with a red pen, mark all the parts of the policy which are likely to generate a cortisol response, a stressor response. Red. Oh, there's a lot of green. Red. Oh, a bit of mediation there. Red. And it's like 80, 90% red. Okay, well, you've just told me people work better when they're a bit happier. Okay, well, I get that. That makes sense. And we're not saying don't have the red pen. You need to have the red pen. Of course you do. That
and you need to explain it to people and say, look, excuse my language, but if you fuck around, then we're going to want to talk to you about the fact that you're fucking around.
Yes.
And people respond really well when we speak to them in ways that they can understand, that we can, show them what's the purpose of what we're doing. But you see, if a lot of it's just driven by somebody who has power and authority, and it's driven by their trauma and their conflict cycle, and them using the workplace as a theatre to act out all the stuff that they've never worked out in their lives, now we're in a different place.
It is fascinating, isn't it? Because, like I say, there's a lot of that psychology and emotion that comes in. Another aspect of people messing around in the way you described is people go, well, hang on, there's a two-tier justice system here, because if I behave in this way, you're going to crush me.
Yeah.
Yeah, the leaders up there, we can see how they're behaving, yet you're protecting them. So is there an element of I can't trust the system because it's two-tier justice? Which, of course, then leads me to another point, because it is two-tier justice. And no, you're right not to trust the system. The reason you can't trust the system is because it's stacked in favour of the house. I was at this festival of work last week, and our stand was called "Don't Gamble with your workplace culture." And the reason I chose the sort of Vegas theme was because I thought it was quite an evocative, quite a fun theme, but also because the cards are stacked in favour of the house, and the croupier are HR. They're dealing the cards. Yeah, and everyone can see it's a two-tier justice system. Everyone can see the house always wins. So when you look at the grievance and disciplinary and performance systems, the ones that I think are so, they're cankers, they're so destructive in our workplaces, employees can see it's stacked against them. It's not fair. You won't be treated fairly. It's not a fair and just system. In fact, Maria, it's the Wild West. And the reason I say that is because in these processes, people say to me, but David, it's about consistency and legal compliance and regulatory controls. Okay, well, show me where in these processes there's any modicum of fairness. Show me where there's governance and oversight. Show me where there's objective decision-making. If you're going through a recruitment process, you'll have objective criteria to protect the employee from discrimination and unfair treatment. If you go through a redundancy process, you have objective criteria to ensure that the redundancies are done fairly and justly. You go through a grievance disciplinary performance management system, there are no objective criteria. There's no scrutiny of the process. The only time you could scrutinise the process is if the employee submits a formal appeal and goes to an appeals process. That's only appeared in the application of the process. So there's no one in the organisation that scrutinises and provides oversight and governance of these systems. So people don't trust them for good reason, because they're not trustworthy. They're not written in favour of the workforce. They are a two-tier justice system. They are broken. They are divisive. They're harmful and destructive. So they don't trust them. Of course, ergo, they don't trust HR. You can't trust HR because they are policing and governance of these systems. And I think HR walk into a great big bear trap here, because you're right, you can't trust HR. That's not an anti-HR statement, because I believe HR strategically is one of the most important functions in our workplaces. I'm the biggest fan of HR that HR will ever have, but not in its current state. If HR are advocating for policies and systems which are stacked against the workforce, stacked in favour of the employer, about treating employees as risk, and not designing in processes which are objective. And again, so when I work with organisations, Maria, like, Burberry, Next, the BBC, big global businesses, as well as smaller organisations, what we start to do is say, actually, let's put in some objective criteria to assess what's the most appropriate route to resolution in this case. And we put the criteria: how serious is it? How long has it been going on for? What's the needs of the individuals? What's the need of the work of the organisation? What risk does this present? And then we use almost like a triaging system to identify the most appropriate route to resolution in each case. And what that does is it starts to do three things. First is people trust it more because they know it's objective. We get the unions involved. We get the managers involved. We get the HR involved. The triumvirates are there as part of a resolution centre. The second thing is, because they trust it, they come to it earlier. Now, isn't early resolution the best resolution? Isn't it getting in and nipping it in the bud? And then the third thing that happens, and this is the bit that I think is the most powerful, this is why I position HR, I should call it by its proper name, people and culture. This is why people and culture function has singly the most strategically important, it becomes the strategically most important function in the world of work, because it can then use this information that's coming through the system to gather insight and data that then can support and drive cultural transformation. And because the people and culture function is managing and governing this amazing process, all of those insights, creativity, innovation, learning, understanding, connection, feeds into the people and culture function. And that then plays into the cultural transformation work, supporting a transformational culture, as I call it. And that, and I think, changes and resets that whole dynamic between HR as was, people and culture as is, in the way that we think about the relationship with managers and workforce. And it can be driven through these powerful systemic changes, which is really what I'm writing books. I'm writing books on this. I've written a number of books.
Yes, and really speaking of which, let's have a chat about that, because how I can frame everything that I've just heard you say about how things are at the moment, and the work that tirelessly you've been working on with great passion to bring about this kind of transformation, is, at the moment, who can tell the truth in any workplace?
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
No. I mean, who can tell the truth? And if I own a business, or I have a stake in the performance of that business, I'm somewhere in that business. If I can't get to the truth, what am I missing? What needed to be dealt with when it was literally, as you say, a possibility for early resolution? Or, and how much have I killed creativity and the possibility for people to be a contribution?
Hugely. And I think it's an important point you say on mentioned on truth, because the way that our systems are framed is they perceive truth as being evidence-based.
Yeah.
And being able to be proven on the balance of probability. On the balance of probability, 51%, the truth is X, Y, Z. And that doesn't take into account my concept of truth, or your concept of truth, I'm sure, here, which is about my perceptions, my needs, my goals, my emotions, my feelings. And truth becomes very much about me and who I am. And also then you have your truth. And how can we get to the truth is to connect people together, to have a powerful dialogue where we can start to understand each other's needs and goals and hopes and motivations. And then my truth can flex a bit because I can hear your truth, so I can adapt my truth. So it becomes very flexible, dynamic, it shifts and it changes. Yes. So if truth is balance of probability, black, right, win, wrong, win, lose, right or wrong, and we're just searching for truth through investigative processes to get to balance of probability, we're missing everything about the concept of truth as very much this human experience. And I think more and more organizations, and the good news is more and more organizations are flexing and adapting and recognizing that truth is human. It's not something that we can prove just through the courtroom. So re-establishing and re-understanding the concept of truth, not as an evidence-based balance of probability measure, but as a human dimension and a connection between human beings, for me, shifts the landscape of the world of work, and it shifts the nature of relationships in the most powerful, profoundly impactful way.
Wow, David. Wow. I think I'm going to ask you to come back and perhaps we'll do a much deeper dive because our time together has sadly come to an end.
Oh, I was enjoying myself.
But what I'd love you to do with the last couple of minutes, if you could, is just tell us about your book, tell us about where you are now. Just give us a snapshot of how people can find out more about you and the books and what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for giving me that opportunity. So yeah, I've got them here. My first one, Managing Conflict, this is the second edition. That was my, when you feel you got a book inside you, that was it. And I wrote down everything I know about conflict resolution and also restructuring and redefining some of those moves towards a resolution approach. My second one, Transformational Culture, I started to take all of that and started to imagine this in a bigger cultural context. I called it a transformational culture, which broadly is defined as fair and just, inclusive, sustainable, as the drivers of high performance. I talked about kindness and compassion, not through the sort of softer side of seeing these things, but as tough management capabilities that we need in the world of work. I'm working on 2 books at the moment, which feels like it's a bit one book too many. One's called How to Disagree Well, and that's being written for The Economist as part of the Economist Edge series. I'm really excited to be working with The Economist for that book, and it's a practical guide to help all of us disagree just a little bit better, Maria, and I hope it's full of practical tools and insights. Then the third one in my trilogy for Kogan Page, my publisher, is called People and Culture, a practical guide for HR and leaders. And I've set myself a bit of a task. It's an exciting book. I'm on about 30,000 words, and it's re-establishing the HR department. It's called the People and Culture Operating Model, which works in 4 quadrants: people, creating people-centered workplaces; culture, developing a positive workplace culture, a transformational culture; strategy is aligning the needs and goals of our workforce with the needs and goals of our organization; and justice, but not retributive justice, transformative justice. So these 4 quadrants in the People and Culture Operating Model: people, culture, strategy, and justice. And I'm just about to go into my interviews, and I've got about 60 chief people officers and CEOs I'm interviewing. So I don't know how I'm going to get 60 case studies into the book, Maria. I'm trying to work it out, but I reached out to a lot of chief people officers, and the response has been awesome. Everyone has come back and said, this is one of the most important books that's going to be written in this topic for a while. So that's got to be done. And that's published on the 3rd of December. So watch this space.
Wow. Thank you, David. This has been absolutely amazing. Will you come back and we take a deeper dive, pick one of those strands and really go into it?
I'll come back. I'd love to, Maria.
Yeah, thank you. This is really, thank you so much. So many words of wisdom, and thank you for gifting your time to us.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to chat about some of my favourite topics.
Bye.
Thank you, Maria. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Love to see you again.